aren't able to attend today or who want to come back and look at some of the information that's shared during the presentations. And we are now recording. So throughout the talk, I'll keep adding people in as they come into the waiting room, and we'll welcome them and make sure that they're muted as they come in. So today's topic is on rental relief, rental support in our community. As you know, COVID has severely impacted many members of our community. At the peak, we hit about 14.5% unemployment. We've dropped back down to about 8.5%. Many people are months behind in their rent payments as a result of not being able to work or not being able to have as many hours as they used to. We already had about 28,000 households in Greensboro that were cost burdened. These are community members who desperately need that monthly paycheck to be able to make rent. They're paying more than 30% of their incomes towards housing and housing related expenses. About half of those are actually severely cost burdened, meaning that they're spending more than half of their income on housing expenses. With so much housing precarity, COVID has resulted in what some are calling a pending tsunami or tidal wave or cliff of evictions. The moratoria that are currently holding that back are set to expire December 31st. And so we'll be talking quite a bit about what's available for rental support, rental relief, tenancy preservation from these organizations. We have today with us Greensboro Urban Ministries, Tyra Clymer, Legal Aid of North Carolina Greensboro office, Janet McCauley Blue, Greensboro Housing Coalition, Sel Mbang, and Salvation Army, Leroy Wilson. We're going to start with Janet McCauley Blue today. She's got a presentation that she's going to make on the resources that Legal Aid has. I will put a bio for Janet in the chat in just a few moments. So that you can read about her. There will be a link to Legal Aid for further information. We will take questions after Janet presents because she has another meeting to get to after her presentation. We'll have about 5 minutes of question and answer, and then we'll move through the other 3 presentations and hold questions until each of them are finished. Feel free to put questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as we go along and building a stack of questions so that I can call on folks when we get to that time period. If there's not any other questions, Janet, feel free to unmute there. I'm going to set up your slides here. Share screen.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Janet McCauley Blue with Legal Aid of North Carolina. And just in the event that anyone doesn't know what Legal Aid is and does, we are a nonprofit law firm for low-income people, and a large part of our work is representing tenants and trying to help them prevent eviction and stabilize their lives and their homes. I would have said only a few days ago that Legal Aid is not one of the providers of rental assistance. However, what I think is great news is that Legal Aid very soon, we are not quite set up yet, but Legal Aid has been awarded funding of about $17 million for 23 counties, and Guilford is one of them, to provide rental assistance. And we're very excited about this. It is available. It does have to be COVID related. It can pay up to 6 months of rent, which I think is more than a lot of the programs are able to pay. But the rent has to all be incurred since April, April 1st. So that means that somebody April through September, if they hadn't paid any rent at all, we potentially could cover that. I don't have a lot of details on that today because we are expecting more training, and legal aid is trying to get set up right now to administer this program. But very soon we are hoping to be set up, and we'll try to distribute some information about how people can apply for and qualify for that program. So I am expecting this to cover maybe some of the larger rental bills that some of the other programs are not able to pay, because we do have to get that money spent by December 31st of this year. So having said that, what I mostly want to talk about is I think people are fairly confused about, or it is very confusing in terms of the various eviction moratoriums or moratoria that are going on in North Carolina right now. So I wanted to talk to you all about that a little bit. And Stephen, can you, how do we advance? Thank you. All right, so there have been various ways to stop evictions in various moratoriums. There is the CARES Act moratorium, which was in effect from March 27th through July 27th this year. But then there was also, going along with that, a 30-day notice requirement. So really, even though it ended in July, it carries on into August. So around the 1st of September, we were expecting there to be a lot of evictions under the CARES Act. The CARES Act only applies to properties that are have some kind of government, federal financial assistance. It would certainly apply to public housing, but also anyone with a federally backed mortgage. So that was a lot of properties that it applied to there. There was also in effect in June what could be called the governor's moratorium, but that was also implemented by Chief Justice Beasley, and that was something that really just took place for the month of June. So we were all expecting this big tsunami of evictions to occur around the beginning of September. And then I don't think, or at least I wasn't expecting the third moratorium, which is issued by the Centers for Disease Control. And it is an emergency order that has basically said that if tenants meet certain criteria, that they cannot be evicted from their homes. And I'm going to go over those criteria. So can I have the next slide? So I just want to say a couple of things about these other moratoriums, because I'm going to mostly talk about the CDC moratorium, but these other moratoriums have still some slight lingering effects. As I said, that this only applies to, for the CARES Act moratorium, it only applies to properties with some kind of government loan or a government assistance. It would apply to Section 8. It would apply to low-income tax credit properties, but it also applies to properties where there is any kind of federally backed mortgage. So that's, as I said, a lot of properties. Why is this still important? It's important. It has expired, but the 30-day notice requirement hasn't expired. So anyone who is covered under the CARES Act is still required to give their tenant a 30-day notice to vacate. So if they did not give a 30-day notice after the moratorium expired back in July or August, then they have to give one now, and that can be used as a defense. Really, and I'll just mention this, the only lingering effect of the the North Carolina moratorium is the fact that people were kind of given a break for June rent. That was just really for the month of June, and they can have until December 31st to pay that rent under certain circumstances. So, but the main one is the CDC moratorium. So what is the CDC moratorium? How does it apply? And what do tenants need to do? The order took effect on September the 4th. It was announced just a few days before that, I think on September 1st or 2nd. And it stops all evictions for non-payment of rent, fees, any kind of charges. It can stop. It can apply to any tenant. It stops landlords from filing the court papers, going to court. It also should stop landlords from issuing writs of possession. So if someone had a judgment prior to September 4th, they would not be able to apply for a writ. Theoretically, they would not be able to apply for a writ after September 4th. Now, the clerks largely are looking at this as, we're not going to try to figure this out for the landlords, because first of all, remember, it only applies to non-payment of rent. So the clerks don't want to get into the middle of this and try to figure this out. So if the landlord goes and applies for a writ, or applies for or files for eviction, the clerks are not going to say, no, you can't do that. So these cases are still going to come into court. Again, also, the tenant has to affirmatively give the declaration to the landlord. So if the tenant just ignores this, doesn't know about it, that's why it's so important to get this declaration into the hands of the tenants who would qualify for it, because the tenant has to take affirmative action here and give the declaration to their landlord. So, and tenants can be evicted for other reasons. There are certain reasons specified, and one reason, criminal activity, property damage, anything that would constitute a violation of the lease. There's an open question there, though, about whether this applies to simply holdover tenants, whether the landlord can say, okay, this is the end of your lease, so I'm going to evict you anyway. We believe that that could be used as a defense, that would not necessarily be grounds for the landlord to evict the tenant, especially if the tenant is behind in the rent. And you can see that basically the landlord is using that as a pretext. So can I have the next slide, please? So, as I said before, it is not automatic. It is very important for the tenant to understand that they have to sign the declaration and they have to give it to their landlord. They can give it to their landlord by email, which would be great because that would give them some proof. They can give it to them in person. It would be a good idea to have a witness. They can also send it to them by mail. I have mixed feelings about certified mail because I think the landlord can figure out what it is and perhaps not pick it up, but they can also go to court and hand it to the landlord when they're in court. So can I have the next slide, please? So what does it say? It's very important that the tenant can answer all of these questions correctly, because there are penalties for perjury if the landlord says something that is not true. So available government assistance, they're supposed to apply for available government assistance. That does not just mean governmental assistance, though. It means any kind of rental assistance. So they have to make reasonable efforts. It doesn't mean that they have to know about all the available assistance. It just means that they have applied for what they know about and they've done the best they can. If they can't apply, if they don't qualify, or they haven't heard about it, or they got put on a waiting list, then they're still making best efforts. It's a good idea for the tenants to keep records of where they've applied and that they've called for appointments or made appointments or put in applications for the assistance. So next slide, please. This is a pretty easy one, and I think we can go through this pretty quickly. The income limits are pretty generous. The tenant has to have one of these three earn less than $99,000 a year, or $198 if filing jointly, or not required to report income in 2019. So I'll just leave that there. A lot of people don't report income sometimes. So, then if you got an economic stimulus check, then you would qualify. So this is going to be pretty much all the people that I think we are likely to encounter. All right, next slide, please. So, and then the tenant must say, I'm unable to pay my rent or make a full payment due to substantial loss of household income, loss of, I can't read all my slide, but they have to just show that they've had a loss of income or wages or extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. Significantly, this loss of income in this case does not have to be related to COVID-19 in any way. They just have to be able to say that they've had a loss of income. Doesn't have to be just a loss of income for the tenant. It can be a loss of income for the tenant's household member. So any kind of loss of income that's made it more difficult to pay the rent. They do not have to provide any particular kind of proof, but if they go to court, in my experience, they may be asked about it. And judges and magistrates are handling this in different ways. Some of them are allowing the landlord or the landlord's attorney to cross-examine tenants about this. And then a major loss of major medical expenses more than 7.5% of adjusted gross income, which sounds like a lot, but for people who are very low income, may not in fact be that much. So next slide, please. I'm using my best efforts to make timely partial payments as close to the full payment as the individual circumstances may permit, taking into account other non-discretionary expenses. So this is pretty vague, but the tenant just has to, in good faith, say that they're doing their best to pay their rent. If they're not able to pay any rent, if they have absolutely no income, then they're still doing their best. But if that tenant has income, if they have, a significant amount of income, they need to have some reason that they can't make full payments. One thing that legal aid can do sometimes is to negotiate a payment plan with the landlord to pay the rent. And the great thing about this moratorium is that this is a great time to negotiate with the landlords, and it kind of puts a pause in there for people to be able to get the rental assistance that they need when so many people are backed up. And then the tenant also has to say that I would likely be homeless or have to move into a shelter or live with other people, move in with friends or somebody else, which applies to a whole lot of people who might not necessarily be homeless, but if they have to move in with their parents or they have to move in with their child or their friend, then that's going to qualify them under this exception. It shouldn't be necessary for the tenant to have to say that they will move into anywhere if the only thing available to them is substandard housing. So next slide, please. And then the tenant has to make the statement that they understand that they have to still pay the rent and comply with their other obligations under the lease, And then this is basically just something that the tenant needs to understand, that they can't falsify this information. The CDC order does not mean that tenants don't have to pay their rent, and it doesn't stop the landlord from charging rent or late fees or any other kind of cost to the tenant. The tenant is still going to owe this rent at the end of the moratorium. All the more reason that they need to make their best efforts to catch up. So next slide, please. And then this is just what I was saying, basically, that they understand that at the end of the moratorium, they will be responsible for paying the entire amount of rent. And so applying for rental assistance during this time is so very important for the tenants. So, and next slide, please. There are criminal penalties. It is very serious. So the tenant needs to be sure that the things that they are saying in this declaration are truthful. These criminal penalties, I want to point out, also apply to landlords. I have not heard of anyone actually being prosecuted, either landlord or tenant, but it will be interesting to see what happens here, because many landlords are getting these declarations, throwing them aside and going ahead and filing against the tenant anyway. They're also going into court and arguing that the tenant should be evicted when they qualify for the moratorium, which is arguably a violation of the order. They're also going and getting writs of possession against the tenants, which is also arguably a violation of the order. Well, it is a violation of the order, I would say. So, you know, we'll just see what happens there. Other things for the tenant to consider. One of the things that this is supposed to be a requirement is that each adult in the household does the declaration, not just the tenant or not just the person on the lease. However, in North Carolina, basically an eviction can only be against the person who signed the lease. So it is unclear what the effects of not having every household member sign the declaration would be. I would argue that anyone who signs the declaration can't be evicted. And there's really no procedure for evicting in North Carolina for evicting the other household members. So it's just kind of an open question, but people should make their best effort to have all the adults in the household sign the declaration if they can. The tenant has to give the signed declaration to the landlord. They need to make sure that they have proof that they've given the declaration. They can email it. As I said, that creates a record. They can hand deliver it. It's a good idea to have a witness if they hand deliver it. They can mail it, and again, certified mail is good in terms of having proof of mailing that the landlord received it. However, it you know, I've been through this with trying to get people served. If the landlord really doesn't want to get it, it tips them off and they don't have to necessarily pick it up, and the tenant should keep a copy of it. If worst comes to worst and they go to court, they need to have a copy in court, and they can give it to the landlord at the time that they're in court. We are making our best efforts right now to cover court. We can't be there every single time, but we're trying to have people there to give out information on the declaration, because especially when this moratorium first began, there were so many people who didn't know. So next slide, please. All right, here is these documents. The declaration is available on the legal aid website, and there are some instructions. There are some new instructions, and if anyone wants that, we'll see if we can. I'm going to ask Dr. Sills if we can email those perhaps to the participants, and I think I've probably gone over my time, so just a few minutes for questions if anyone has any. Let's see what we have in the chat.
Yeah, so we have from Andrew Young, $17 million for 23 counties. Does Ms. Blue know if this is considered sufficient for the problem? Does legal aid think it will require more?
That is a question that goes beyond the powers of my crystal ball. It's probably never sufficient. We will probably always need enough money. I'm concerned about the time frame since this money has to be spent by December 31st. But, you know, it's probably never enough money. But
One of the data points that we had from a recent Urban Institute report was that there's almost 1 million families in North Carolina that are cost burdened across the state in the lowest quintile of earnings for their communities. So those who are in the poorest category and cost burdened, nearly 1 million households. If all of them were needing assistance, then this certainly wouldn't be sufficient. From Richard Poole, a question, how is the landlord compensated for their loss, utilities, taxes, etc.?
This is outside my realm of expertise, and I think it's also up to Congress to do that. There are various programs in place. I think that might potentially benefit landlords, but I'm really not the best person to answer that question.
From Tennille Lewis, what are the 23 counties who can receive rental assistance? Is that going to be on the LANC website?
Okay. I am not sure if that will be on the website, and I cannot name them all off the top of my head. They seem fairly random to me, but I know that they're not. Guilford and Forsyth are included.
Katrina Whiteside asks, what is the name of the declaration? Where online could I find it? I think we've put that both in the chat.
Right.
I linked to the CDC eviction docs.
Stephen, is it possible to email that to
Yes.
all the people who participated today?
Correct.
Thank you. I'll get that to you so that you can get that out to people.
Will do. New questions. Kelsey White, are tenants with undocumented immigration status protected under the CDC moratorium?
They should be, yes. It does not have any exception for undocumented tenants.
A follow-up on that, will the funding also be provided for those who are undocumented?
The legal aid, I don't know the full answer to that question. Legal aid is not allowed by regulation to represent people who are undocumented. Whether this would apply to the funding, I do not know the answer to that question.
Thank you. Andrew Young asks, is there an emerging record of certain landlords who are aggressively, unfairly going after tenants? Would it be proper to share their names?
At this point, I think it's just too early to really say that certain people are aggressively going after landlords. If you know of certain landlords who are particularly aggressive, then it's probably in that group, and I would not feel comfortable sharing names in this forum.
John Louder, I'm going to ask you to ask your question.
Sure, thanks, Stephen. This is John Louder. I'm the executive director for the Piedmont Triad Apartment Association. One of the questions, I've been getting a lot of member feedback, and to be clear here, most of the companies that I work with are professionally managed property management companies with larger apartment communities. So these are
Right.
not, so to be clear, these are generally not small operators. What they're doing is they're showing up in court. They've had residents who maybe they've tried to work with, they've reached out to them, tried to reach out to them for 6 months to work out a payment plan, to do anything, get any kind of response. They get no response. They show up at court. The residents show up and they are approached and told they can sign a declaration and they won't be evicted until at least January without. And again, I don't know how, I want to be clear, I don't know how widespread this is, if this is 1 time, 2 times. but I have gotten, well, I know it's more than a couple of times because I've gotten multiple calls. So the question I have is, and what they've observed is that they're getting these declarations handed to them without any guidance. Just said, sign this and you'll be okay. And my worry is that they're being opened up to risk of perjuring themselves without understanding that risk. And then my question really is, what kind of guidance are you? And I'm not even saying that these are legal aid folks. These could be other housing advocates. Who knows? It could be friends. It's just that it's been observed. So I guess my main question is, what kind of guidance are you giving your folks to the legal aid folks, and what guidance would you give to anybody else who's working as a housing advocate to avoid that risk?
Okay, so if someone is a legal aid client, we give them guidance. We walk through the declaration with them. We make sure that they understand what it is, and we make sure that they understand that their answers need to be truthful and kind of satisfy ourselves that they qualify for the affidavit declaration, rather. That's what we do to those people who actually become our clients. When we're giving information in the courthouse, we can't give individual legal advice, and we don't. I mean, we do tell people as a matter of information that they need to be sure that all the statements in the declaration are accurate, but we don't give information beyond that because we can't. These people are not our clients, and we can't give them individual legal advice. We're there to provide information. So if they fill out the declaration and it's false, that's not because of any information that we gave them. And definitely people are not saying just sign this and you won't have to pay your rent. I think everybody over there that I know of has said you need to be careful, be sure that this information is accurate.
I appreciate that. And one quick follow-up question, if I can, and this is related to the funding for the rental assistance. Do you happen to know if that's from the 117 million-ish that the state's getting ready to roll out as part of that? Okay.
It is.
So last question, Leroy Wilson asks, when is the estimated start date to assistance for individuals and families?
Yeah, I don't have a very exact start date. I just keep being told soon. I am told that we will have training on this next week. So I think it possibly could happen next week. It's got to start soon though. Yeah,
we're already into October rent and we've got
right.
two months to spend this. Yep.
Right, but I just, in fairness to legal aid, I just want to say everybody was really scrambling when we got this money, and people have to be hired to administer it. So it's taking a little bit of time to get everything in place.
Well, thank you very much, Janet, for presenting. This is exciting news that there's going to be more resources for the community, that it's combined with legal assistance and addressing many of the questions that folks have around the moratoria.
All right.
Thank you so much. We're going to move now to Sel Mbang with Greensboro Housing Coalition. Sel, do you want me to pull up that flyer now, or do you want to wait on that? You're muted still.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you can pull up the flyer and then I'll just do a little introduction and give you some background information, and then we'll look at the flyer all together. Thank you, Janet, for covering the background details on the federal moratorium as it relates to North Carolina. In Greensboro, it's a really unique city in that we are really dedicated to improving housing conditions and making the critical link to how housing is connected to our health. And with the moratorium being in place, it helps renters adhere to best practices such as social distancing and other infection control measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. This also allows state and local authorities to more easily implement stay-at-home orders as things are consistently changing and help people keep their social distance. And so there's a lot of questions as I'm talking to community members. What happens between that time period? And this is where the Greensboro Housing Coalition is stepping in to provide families with rental and utilities assistance. And so if the moratorium is not paired with a financial assistance to provide, then families could be backed with rent much further after December 31st. And that has been much of a concern as a moratorium was in place. The city of Greensboro has been awarded $3.9 million from the CARES Act funding, and of that $2 million is to help with providing rental and utilities assistance and other housing needs during this time. The Greensboro Housing Coalition is working with the city to distribute the CARES Act funding to support qualified households with rent and utility payments. And this is where the flyer comes in handy, so families know who is qualified for this assistance. And so we are requiring that there is that people who apply are within the city limits. We have experienced people applying that come from different cities, but we do let people know that this is only limited to those within the city of Greensboro limits. So the person has to have a current lease through February 2020 and behind on rent and utilities as of June 30th to 2020. Household income is less than 80% of the area median income, and we have a chart below for families to see. And they cannot pay rent or utilities due to economic harm from COVID-19. So there has to be proof that they were impacted, and this can be shown through letters or pay stubs that hours have been reduced or that they haven't been able to receive any funding, such as let me see what's on. And they must be 18 years of age or older and document that proves that they live in that address, and they have to provide an ID. So those are the requirements that we have for families who are applying for a program who qualify. And so we can provide up to $1,500 for rental assistance and $400 for utilities, totaling $1,900 per household. So that is what our program is currently providing to help with the concern of eviction during this time period. If there's any questions, maybe I can answer some during my time.
So we have one question in the chat already. Let's see, what about utility assistance? Where can a family go for help? What if a person is living in a family home, like a parent's home, and does not have a lease?
Taylor, I know you're on the call. If you could help support and answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So for utility assistance, there is an application online. You'll see www.greensborohousingcoalition.org. There'll be a button on the homepage where you can press and get some more detailed information about the program, as well as download the application. And filling out the application, you can email it. All the information about turning it in is available online. You can also drop it by GHC offices at 1031 Summit Avenue. So applying for utility assistance, it's the same form as rental assistance. They're combined. Currently, the process is taking some time due to such high demand and staff capacity. But that application can be turned in and will be addressed as in the order it was received. And then in terms of not having a lease, I am not certain about that, but from my understanding, that would not qualify. These funds are being paid directly to landlords and utility companies rather than passing through the leaseholder. But if you'd like to give us a call, somebody who has a little bit more insight into that can probably answer that question than I can. Our number is 336-691-9521.
Hey, Taylor, this is Josie. Dr. Sills, I can speak to that. I'm just coming into the call.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So the question regarding if a person is living in a family home, like a parent's home, and does not have a lease. So, and then another question regarding what about utility assistance? Where can a family go for help? Again, we are providing up to $400 for utility assistance. I know Salvation Army and Greensboro Urban Ministries are going to be also assisting with utility assistance. That is in the process of development now. And that has not rolled out yet, but that is coming because the city of Greensboro recognized the need being so great. There is some funding allocation that's going to assist those organizations in partnership with GHC to also do utility assistance. Second question, what if the person is living in a family home, like a parent's home, and does not have a lease? We try to operate in any window of opportunity to help that household. So we also have to honor the guidelines like Sel described and like everyone saw on the flyer. I have been able to say if anyone in that home has been impacted by COVID-19 in any kind of way. So if it's a family living together, you could be an individual and the lease or someone it's under someone's name, that's okay. As long as someone in that household has a financial harm due to COVID-19. So if you're in the household and it's your mother and she lost hours, that's economic harm to that household. If you are the leaseholder and she is not, it doesn't matter. Someone in that household has had economic harm due to COVID-19, and that's the guideline that I see. And no one has told me any different from that. And so with that, yes, we have been able to assist families and individuals who had that. The key thing here is what is on the flyer. You still have to show proof that you live at that home. Thing. And as long as we can verify that proof, then you qualify and meet the other qualifications, then we are okay.
Thank you, Josie. Kelsey White has a question. Are individuals who do not have Social Security number but are an I-10 eligible, have an I-10, are they eligible to receive assistance?
If they do not have a Social Security number but have an I-10.
Correct.
I haven't received any notification regarding that type of guideline. I can check into that. Each case that we handle is handled on a case-by-case basis. Someone mentioned documented versus undocumented, and as Janet, advised, as far as legal aid, they're not able to assist. I would say to everyone on this call, because that is a sensitive subject, and we try to create any room for opportunity to help the household. If there is a special circumstance, I would say, let's talk about that individually with your counselor, because due to the sensitivity of things like that, I would not want to be honest, have that conversation on here. I will say we have assisted across varied situations, and I'll just leave it at that. And so if there's an issue that has a special circumstance, anyone is welcome to email me. If you get a housing counselor and you have any questions about that and you feel like you're not getting the answer that you need, I do not mind taking a call or answering questions directly with an individual client, or to kind of give some guidance to our team regarding special circumstances.
Next question is, how much has been allocated and how much has been spent?
Now, as far as allocation to GHC, GHC received $713,000, and I think that was put out there a few months ago when they actually notified everybody in a press release about those funds. But GHC received $713,000. We have gone through roughly close to $100,000. And keep in mind, this program started August the 6th, and we've gone through roughly close to right at 100,000. The funding goes so quickly because the need is so great. We are literally getting applications in by the minute, and that's not an exaggerated number. Literally, they come in by the minute. So we are going through funding usually within a $60,000 range every 3 weeks or so, if not a little bit under that. So the funding is going quickly, which is why there's more funding being allocated. So it's a great thing that legal aid is going to be able to receive funds for Guilford County. I was told we don't know that allotment yet, but that will be able to create some leverage to be able to support the need that's out here. And I can't remember, Dr. Seals, how much went to Salvation Army and Greensboro Urban Ministries, but out of that bucket of CARES, it went to several organizations.
And both of them will be presenting in just a moment.
Yeah.
Is there a formula that you're using to determine the amount that you will provide based on the applicant's request? What is the current timeline for replying to applicants?
So there's, as far as formula is regarding the up to $400 and up to $1,500 for rental and up to $400 for a utility, there isn't a formula per se. If you have a light bill that's $500, we'll send $400 max to energy. If you have rent and you owe $1,300, you're going to get $1,300 if you qualify. If you owe $1,600, we can do $1,500. And what we've been doing is talking to the landlords and negotiating and helping them assist their tenants with payment options. We had a situation where, of course, we can max out at $1,500 for rental, but this particular program stipulates that the landlord must waive certain fees. So in many cases, when the landlord is in a situation where honestly they're not able to do that and they're still trying to recoup money, and that's totally understandable, we have worked with tenants and their landlords on payment options because we can't do the fees, we can't do damages to a unit and that sort of thing. But we give the max, so up to what we've been told. Now, as far as formula on the city side, how they came up with that, I think from my understanding, they decided on the 1,500 mark because that is the mark that we have been doing across different programs prior to COVID-19. And they could have chosen probably to go higher than that, but because the need is so great, you have to consider the higher the amount is great, but that money will go even faster if we did $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 caps. That's why it's critical that we have flexibility in other types of funding, and us to be able to partner with agencies like Legal Aid or Greensboro Urban Ministries and Salvation Army. If we all have funds, we can leverage one another. So if a tenant has come in, which we have done this over the summer when we had some funds that have been exhausted, we have been able to pay and assist folks prior to these CARES Act funding if it was $3,000. Because if we can max out CARES Act at $1,500 through our program, and Salvation Army can say, well, I can provide this, then we can create a longer term stability for that household. But right now, we don't have those flexible funds or other buckets of funding yet that have come in. So we're kind of just sitting, waiting for more funds to come in so we can create a larger opportunity for assistance.
Great. Thank you, Josie, Taylor, and Sel. We're going to move on now to Leroy Wilson with Salvation Army. There we are. Thank you.
Well, with Salvation Army, everyone knows that our focus has been shelter and moving individuals into permanent housing. That's what we know, that's what we're good at. So pre-COVID, we did not have any emergency financial assistance, but mid-COVID, we started seeing the growth in the requests for food assistance, but also for rental assistance and utility assistance. Individuals had started going back to work, but not going back in a full-time aspect. And so they were needing that assistance to offset some of the rent that they were falling behind, even though the moratorium hadn't really taken in effect for those individuals. So since mid-COVID, we've been seeing over 250 applications that are coming in a week for this assistance. Since April of this year, we continue to see an increase for rental assistance and utility assistance. Even within the moratorium that individuals are in, the past due rent does not go away. So where we're kind of stuck in the middle of is that you have individuals that have a large amount of back rent that is due, and for the assistance that we can provide, if it's not the whole balance of the rent, then you have an individual that is still having an outstanding amount that they're having to pay. That's why a partnership like the one with Greensboro Housing Coalition and Greensboro Urban Ministry, that if we have private funds, then we are able to pair those together to address the larger issue of individuals that are facing that eviction status. What we've also learned is that renters are not the only ones that are being affected by this situation. Landlords are being affected as well. Landlords have depended on the rent from the renters to maintain the property for those private landlords. And so when there's no payment from, from the renter to the landlord becomes to be in a situation whereas they are being compromised as far as providing that housing for that individual. And some private landlords may only have 3 to 5 properties. And if that happens on a continual basis with them, then we have a renter that is out of housing, and we have a landlord that is not able to provide that housing based off of the rent that he or she has not received to maintain the unit. In January, we are expecting to see a large number of evictions to take place. Our local news broke this story on the other day. There are expected to be anywhere between 345,000 to 542,000 households at risk of eviction in our state of North Carolina. And that literally scares us here at Salvation Army because of the fact that, one, we are a shelter. And so if individuals are evicted from their primary housing based off of them not being able to pay their rent, and as a shelter, we are operating at a 50% capacity based off of the pandemic and COVID related to be able to distance individuals from being together. So you're going to have a flooded system of individuals that normally are not homeless and have not ever experienced homelessness on top of the individuals that are homeless currently in shelters or in the street. So with that number, it is very alarming to me and to some of our other counterparts of what is going to happen with this process. Yeah. So as far as the assistance that we have provided throughout the community, since we have received private dollars as well as some state funding, we're going through about 80,000 a week in assistance for rental and utility assistance. We did receive from our ESG CARES funds funding that was directly related to rehousing homeless individuals and families that were placed in the hotel by the city. And that program is still going and rehousing those individuals that were affected by that. Stephen?
Leroy, is it okay if I drop in the chat a link to the emergency assistance program?
Yes.
Great.
So for individuals that are presenting for services, our application is online on our website. Steve will post that link in there. Individuals can download that application. There are required documents that are specified within the application that must be turned in. And individuals can either upload that application with the documents required, or they can completely fill it out and turn that in to our location at 1311 South Elm Eugene Street.
And Megan Wright asks, thank you, Leroy. Can you repeat the number of households that were at risk in January?
Yes, 345,000 to 542,000 households in our state are at risk of eviction come January the 2nd. And that news was broken by Fox 8.
We know from the latest data from the administration of the court that there's 18,000 backlogged cases currently filed for summary ejectment or eviction statewide. And that really happened in that short window between the expiration of one moratorium and the start of the other. There were just a few days in which the courts were inundated with new applications. Any other questions for Greensboro Urban Ministries? I'm sorry, Salvation Army's Leroy Wilson. And I put the Urban Ministry link in there, not the Salvation Army. Let me get that one for you.
That's cool.
I had that one waiting, so I'll put that in just a moment. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move now to Tyra Clymer with Greensboro Urban Ministry.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Great, great. And thank you for hosting today. I'm here, excuse the mask, everyone. I'm here, have coworker Lily Brown in the office with me. So we're continuing to abide.
I'm sorry, we lost your audio for just a moment there.
She's on mute, Stephen.
Yep, there we go.
Got it?
Yep, thank
Okay.
you.
So I'm here with my coworker Lily Brown. Again, excuse, had my mask on, but we're trying to abide by the CDC guidelines. And we just say there is hope. Can I get an amen? There's hope. We're working together, and along with the other agencies, I can definitely say amen to everything that Mr. Wilson said. We are seeing a large number of people that we've never seen before come in for assistance. A lot of new faces, and we're so glad that we can be here with our participating agencies to help out. We're now providing with funds that have been donated. Monthly, we've been averaging approximately $70,000 in rental assistance. We have not seen as many people for utility assistance, and that is because of the utility moratorium. But as of yesterday, that was definitely over. That moratorium has been lifted, and so we've, over the past few weeks, I think our neighbors have been anticipating that moratorium being lifted. So we have our numbers have increased a little bit with the utility request, but we do expect that will increase over the next few weeks. We've been in and out of conversation with Duke Energy to just talk about how the payment arrangements are going to be done with since the moratorium has been lifted. So hopefully on the next meeting, we can talk to you more about what's going on with Duke Energy and Piedmont Natural Gas as well. But getting back to the housing, like I said, we've been providing about almost $70,000 a month in rental assistance. Our shelter continues to accept as many people as they can, individuals and families as they can. Like Salvation Army, we are making sure that we are abiding by the social distancing. We are planning for the winter, working on a plan, because normally our numbers go way up in the winter. We provide a lot more shelter, but this year is going to be a little more challenging for us, but we are working on a plan now, have received some funds to place more people in hotels. Because of COVID, our response was that we place people in hotels. So hopefully over the winter, as it gets colder, we get more requests for shelter. So we're hoping that we will get some more funds generated to help us to place more folks in hotels. We are also, as far as grocery assistance, we have not had as many orders for grocery assistance because so many people in the community, churches and organizations are helping families and communities with grocery assistance. But we do anticipate as we move farther into this process that we will begin to see more requests. I wanted to go back to a question that was asked about the ITIN numbers. We do accept ITINs, but if a person does not have an ITIN number, we have a memorandum of understanding with Faith Action where we will send that person or get that person in touch with Faith Action, and Faith Action vets that person for us. They give us a number that we can use. And so if you have someone who is challenged with not having the ITIN number, we do have a pot of funds that we can help with. If they don't have proper ID and Social Security documentation, we do not want that to be a hindrance to anyone here. And so just reach out to us and we'll do all we can to help. Otherwise, we are keeping it moving here. We do, as Greensboro Housing Coalition Director reported, we have received a pot of funds. We are in the process of getting all the paperwork together with the city and making sure that we have enough staff to cover. Really want to thank the Greensboro Housing Coalition for all they are doing to keep things going with that pot of funds right now, but we will be jumping on board very soon to start assisting with the city's pot of funds as well. Dr. Seals.
Thank you, Tyra. Any questions for Tyra and Greensboro Urban Ministries? Let's go ahead and open it up. Feel free to unmute and ask questions, chat about other resources. We have plenty of time here to really create a conversation around this issue. Andrew, do you want to jump in? I see you just posted a question.
Hey everyone, and thank you, Ms. Clymer. It's good to see that the dollars are coming into your organizations. And I'm impressed by the creative work that you're all doing to make sure folks are taken care of. But I guess my question is a big general one. Do you all feel confident that our area has the collective resources to respond to the coming tsunami, as Dr. Sills has called it? Do you all feel that our leadership is ready to provide more money or more resources as needed? And I know that's a sensitive kind of question, because you're in the business of service providing and you're all thankful for the dollars that are coming in. But it's just a general question like, do we feel like we have enough money and resources? And does our leadership, are they fully aware of the scope of the problems and how big they can get? And are they ready to basically give you all guys more money or to chase down more dollars for you all?
Miss Tyra, you're on mute. Miss Clark. There you go.
I got you. Am I back now?
Yes.
Thank you. That's a very good question, Andrew. I agree with you. Our leadership will have to be in place because, like you said, it is a tsunami. But I think it's just like what Professor Seals, Dr. Seals, has set up today. These meetings are key, and I think it gives us the opportunity to reach out to our leaders, our city leaders, our county leaders, and keep them updated on what we're seeing, even to the point of maybe having to go to the meetings, the city council meetings or the county meetings, Andrew, to keep them abreast of what's going on. So I think it's just going to be something that we'll have to continue to advocate for.
Andrew, I'd like to chime in too, Dr. Sills. We are very grateful for the funding that we do get from our local and city government, but it's not enough funding to cover the need. When we're looking at a tsunami of homelessness that is going to be affecting our county, that's something big, and that's going to be numbers that we haven't seen before if we are not in front of it. And 2 months ahead of it is not enough time to address the issue. Our leadership is preparing to serve at any capacity that we can, but due to the lack of funds, the support that we're going to need is going to kind of cripple us to do that. So there are more funds that are needed within our city of Greensboro. Our city officials, I'm sure that they're aware, as well as I'm hoping that our county officials are as well. We are a part of our continuum of care, which should be addressing that issue as well. So I'm not sure how they are looking at addressing it to bring about a solution, but that would be something that we would want to hear as well.
Dr. Shields, this is Josie. I agree with the remarks of Tyra and Leroy. I don't think the gravity of the situation is understood to the full extent. And I'll just give you, for an example, since August the 6th, when we started the program with the CARES Act, we have received 11,000 plus calls. So from August the 6th, and that was August the 6th till September the 30th. Our normal call volume is 129 calls a day. That call volume increased from 129 calls a day to 582 calls a day. In a normal 3-week period, we average under 900 calls in a 3-week period. We are averaging in a 3-week period 3,000 calls. And so, as Leroy pointed out, the need for the funding or the amount of the funds does not coincide with the need that's out here. And then also, there has to be an understanding of the need for capacity building within those funding allocations. There has to be understanding of the need to increase staff to handle what's coming and what we're already faced with. Someone asked earlier, and I don't want to lose sight of that question, I just was waiting. How quickly are the applications processed? So the applications can go as quickly as a client gives us the required documentation that's laid out on that flyer. Once we get that required documentation from beginning of intake process, from the time we pull your application to the time a check is cut for that household, it usually takes 1 week. Now, that could be longer depending on how quickly we get the required documentation back. And I don't think folks understand there's compounding issues layered on top of this, because we are dealing with communities and many that oftentimes are not able to connect with us online. And we, in the midst of this pandemic, our agencies are not fully staffed in-house. And so we have to rely with technology. So we've had to revamp how we see clients, how we handle the applications. That plays a role in capacity, and that plays a role in the application process. That means funding allocation has to be flexible. It is, to me, I don't want to use the word irresponsible, but I'm just being frank. It is not a good thing to have funding that does not allow the room for increased staff and the capacity that's needed for this need. So that's where we are with that.
Just a quick back of the envelope calculation here based on just these 3 agencies, not counting anyone else. That's $250,000 a month worth of rental assistance that's being pushed out. That's more than $3 million a year. That's $1 million more than the entire budget of the COC for the entire county. So we're pushing out a lot of resources. A lot more are going to be needed. Molly Blafer has a question. Do any of the assistance programs spoken about today have a duplication policy, as in if a tenant gets assistance from Salvation Army, can they apply for assistance from other programs? Does anybody want to take that one? Leroy?
Yeah, I will, Dr. Sills. I actually responded in the chat. Individuals that, or agencies that are receiving ESG funding, especially this CARES funding, are required to enter that data into HMIS, which is a information data system that is shared with agencies that use that portal. And with that, you're able to see real-time data of individuals that are being assisted throughout the various programs.
Thank you. Next question is from Grant. And Grant, I'm gonna single you out if you're still there. Grant is with us from Virginia. Are you on still? He turned off his camera just a moment ago. He's asking, is the faith community stepping forward in a greater measure to help those organizations with funding assistance? And if we can get him back in, he's in a redevelopment authority in Virginia, and I might want to get his perspective on what they're doing differently or similarly there. But faith community, Greensboro Urban Ministries, Salvation Army, long-standing connections with faith community, has that increased? Tyra's.
Yes, here at Greensboro Urban Ministry, we have had some congregations and faith communities reach out to us who were already assisting folks who were in jeopardy of losing their housing, and they actually have a separate pot of funds that they generated to help folks who've been affected by COVID. We had 3 congregations reach out to us to let us know if we needed some extra funds, just to let them know. So there's also the Guilford Congregational Assistance Network that has been around for several years, and they have also boosted up their funds in those different congregations to assist.
And could I follow up on that? Is this the kind of funding that's no strings, that you're able to leverage, where some of the governmental funding might have restrictions on documentation status and social security numbers and things like that? Are these funds that are from faith communities able to be more deployed more creatively?
Yes, absolutely. And with our funds, our executive director and our assistant executive director have asked us to make sure that we are being very creative with the funds that's been donated to our organization as well.
Great. Leroy, have you seen the same thing? Faith community stepping in to assist further?
Yes, we have seen the faith community step in. Agreeing with Tyre as far as with the GCAN network, as well as other churches that have partnered with us in the past to provide some of that assistance. It does allow us, when you're getting in those private funds from faith communities or even individuals, it allows you to leverage other funding that you may have to address that need. And those funds are typically non-discretionary funds that don't hold a guideline to them as far as like requirements such as ESG may do, or our federal funding may require us to have certain things in place for it.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Marianne, I see you eager to say something.
It's not so much a question, it's just a huge concern I have. And I don't know, I worry about it daily. People who are right now, have been for years, in inadequate housing and poor housing with rodents and such. And now, there's going to be all these extra people. I don't know as a community what can be done. I'm thinking of, I'm trying to think outside the box. Who else is thinking outside the box? You know, schools are empty. Well, I don't know if they're going to be empty, but could we use schools as a place for people to go? Yeah.
You're right. It's very concerning.
Steve, can I
Yeah,
jump in one more
definitely. Yeah.
second? It's two things that I want to kind of bring up, and I don't want to be the one kind of like a bearer of bad news, but even in this ESG funding, CARES funding that we're going to be receiving, it is important to know that one of the guidelines that is in this requirement is that individuals are in fair market rate housing. And a lot of individuals that are going to be affected by this are not in fair market rate housing. That is like a 1-bedroom that is $661, a 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom, all of those ranges that fall within there. Some of these individuals that we have seen that have been presenting for assistance are not in fair market value. And so the assistance that's going to have to be provided to them would have to be some other private money because they don't fall within those spectrums of that. The second thing is that COVID has really exacerbated the lack of affordable housing to where affordable housing is not in existence really in communities to transition individuals into those locations. So it's difficult for us as a housing agency to find landlords that are willing to move forward and rent to individuals that have experienced homelessness or are experiencing homelessness. So on top of the fact that, you know, we're faced with this and the lack of funding to do all this, affordable housing in the area is very low.
Mr. Austin.
There we are. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. The information that has been shared has been great, but I'm with Welfare Reform Liaison Project, and we also have CARES dollars that we're providing for rental assistance and utility assistance. We can provide up to $1,000 in rental assistance and up to $500 in utilities assistance. So I wanted to make sure that you all have us down also as a resource because we have been referring people to you all. Since July, we have received 1,079 applications for assistance. And we've had this conversation earlier about the need for more staffing because it's becoming more and more difficult to respond to requests in a timely manner. But you know, we're trying to do that. And I'm going to throw this out there also. We talked about housing. Thank you. We talked about housing, but the other tsunami that's getting ready to hit Guilford County is this unemployment. And we're going to have to be in a position where we can get people acclimated to being able to work for the companies that are in need, and there are a lot of them that are in need, although many have closed since the pandemic hit. But we really need to take these next couple of months to try to get out in front of that train also. But I just wanted to share that information with you all and let you know that we are also a resource that you can refer people to. In order to qualify, you have to be 200% below the income limit, and the flyer was just up. You can reach me at any time. I am the program manager handling the emergency assistance COVID funding, and we'll just do all that we can. Now, we cover the entire county, so we're also working in High Point, and Greensboro has a lot more resources than High Point at this time. So that need in High Point is great also.
Can you drop your contact information in the chat for folks?
I sure will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see Grant is back on. Do you want to chime in there, Grant?
Thanks, Stephen. I'm sorry, I'm juggling multiple.
I understand.
Yeah. No, and just adding a comment there that what we're seeing in certain markets here in Virginia is that your property owners, your hotel owners, things like that, are already taking a significant hit on out of the COVID situation because nobody's traveling. Few people are traveling. Thusly, they've been more receptive to accepting a lesser rental rate to help us house folks that are in immediate kind of danger of homelessness or who are just in need of some type of housing. It's certainly not a long-term fix. You hate to think of it as a benefit of the current situation, but it's an option that folks may want to consider. I'm sure the organizations are already leaning on their hotel partners as hard as they can as it is, but I'll just put it out there. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, Joseph, for putting your contact information out there. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on eviction moratoria, the expiration in January, pending wave of evictions, the need for affordable housing options, rent assistance, or other programs that we haven't talked about, resources, assets that we could be leveraging?
Stephen, this is John Louder.
Thank you.
What I will, one of the earlier questions I was asked is what can we do? And, as with a lot of things, there are certain times that I think our group, the industry groups, can be perceived as the opposite side of the aisle or what have you. One of the things that we can all do is advocate for rent assistance in Congress. As has been pointed out, the funds that are there, the capacities that's there at the local level isn't going to be adequate. One of the things we're going to have to grapple with is that local and state budgets are going to be drastically impacted by all of this. So their funding is going to be they're probably, if we're being realistic here, you could be looking at layoffs coming in local governments and at the state government. You could see reduced programs across the board with some of the budget impacts they're going to take. So, we need to all advocate for rent assistance. I think it's safe to say that I can tell you the National Apartment Association and the state apartment associations have been advocating for 6 months now for rent assistance and increased rent assistance. The issue, one of the real challenges with the CDC, it's not really a moratorium, it's a CDC order. And one of the problems with it is that it was not married to rent assistance. And as somebody pointed out, what we're doing is kicking the can down the road. And so you're going to see a significant increase in people who owe not just 6 months rent, but 8, 9, 10 months rent. And the impact on the housing provider is pretty severe and pretty drastic. For those who have, for those who are managing, who maybe they only have we talked about it before, 4 or 5, 6 properties, maybe even 2 or 3. If one of their residents can't pay rent for half the year, it's going to be very difficult for them to meet their own obligations. And so I think short-term advocating with Congress for increased rental assistance is going to be critical. I think one of the things that has that helped keep things from going completely out of control over the summer were the unemployment benefits that the federal government came up with. So that did help. But long term, short term, we need to do that advocacy, and then long term, we really have to get serious about addressing the affordable housing shortage in the community, because that is a very real problem. And Stephen's probably sick of hearing me say this, but the affordable housing problem is actually part of a much larger issue, which is just housing. We don't have enough housing being built, and haven't had for at least 10 or 15 years. And so until we can address those systemic problems, we're just continually kicking the can down the road and reacting and not being proactive in how we address the needs for the community. So the rent assistance is in the very near future is one thing we can all do, is advocating for more rent assistance across the board. And I will probably be saying this for I don't know how many, hopefully not years, but for the next few months, I think that's going to be the call to action.
Thank you, John. I posted in the chat, previously Sel had mentioned the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They have a Take Action Now website where you can add your name and information to an appeal for that funding. Sorry, Josie, going to mute you there, a little echo. So do take advantage of that. It is interesting seeing the coming together of the apartment associations, the landlord associations, and the housing advocates, all saying build, build, build new housing, rehab old housing, get more housing available. The market does not have enough housing opportunities. And so you have folks at the mid and upper end who could afford housing taking up some of the space in the affordable and mid-range. Just more housing will be helpful to the situation. Definitely, though, more affordable units being provided, multifamily, single-family, homeowner opportunities, et cetera, and lots of efforts around those. This is all linked together, whether we're talking about homelessness on one end of the continuum, whether we're talking about single-family home ownership on the other end of the continuum, and everything in between that you need for shelter. It's all part of the same system and economic process. Does anybody have any last thoughts, questions, or information to share?
Hi, Stephen.
Yes.
This is Shawnee.
Hi, Shawnee. How are you?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't get to hear everything that you just said, but I do have a concern, and I share Mary Ann's concern about the need for our elected officials and all the relevant agencies and organizations to be able to think creatively. What concerns me is come January is something, I understand that now everybody's functioning in triage mode, and that makes perfect sense. But my concern is what happens come January, because we know with all the assistance that's available, we're still going to have tons of people that are without a place to live. And so I'm very curious and concerned about what people are thinking about what's going to happen come January, what's being put in place. Is there anybody that is able to turn their attention to that now and begin to look at some things that we can do?
Bruce, I don't want to put you on the spot. Are you still there? Yep.
I'm here.
Do you want to just give the thumbnail of the mediation project, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the other efforts that are going on systemically?
Yeah, as some of you know, we at the center, in partnership with the City of Greensboro, the Housing Coalition, Legal Aid, and many others, have been in the planning stages of a mediation project in response to the the call that the Chief Justice and others put out at the beginning of this moratorium process to establish mediation services around the state, to add another tool in the toolbox of intervention in what we expect and still expect, as was just mentioned, a big increase in evictions. And so the main thrust of the mediation project is to work with providers of emergency rental assistance with the specific objective of persuading landlords and tenants to adopt payment plans, settle their differences, and above all, to avoid letting the case slip into eviction proceedings, or if it's in eviction proceedings, to get it out of there as early as possible. Mediation is an alternative dispute resolution procedure, and in the case of the eviction crisis, specifically an alternative to eviction, which if we can help to achieve, is going to, I think, benefit landlords and tenants and the community. So we're gearing up to be ready. We're not quite there yet, but with that service before January.
I also know from City of Greensboro that there's an effort to coordinate services as a system and not just a triaged response. Part of this hinges on the new 10-year plan for housing, using this crisis as an opportunity to bring all of the organizations you've heard from today and others together into a system of responses, whether you're facing homelessness, whether you're facing issues with your housing quality and health outcomes, whether you're looking at affordability, or simply the number of housing units that are available, but thinking systemically across from developers to service providers in a more coordinated fashion. That's coming through a number of discussions between agencies and the city. Andrew, I see that you've made.
I'm just reinforcing what you've already said, Stephen. That short of, since nobody really knows what's going to happen on the big dollar level, that I guess is going to be federal interventions. As you said, on the more local level here, what exactly can we do to use Mary Ann's words, to think out of the box and to be as resourceful as we can to at least partially deal with the problems.
Just one last thing that I've been driving around just to get out of the house and don't get out of the car, but driving around and have found a number of derelict houses. And those could be shelters. They could be homes for people. And I don't know, I know that the city had a program a couple of years ago saying that they were going to address this issue of derelict housing and either take over the house or redo the house. And I know that Habitat has been doing some of that work, but there seems to be a lot, especially in the eastern part of Greensboro, of derelict houses that could be renovated with, I would hope, a little bit of money, but not a huge amount of money, to get people in those homes. How is that going?
Yes, so the city has established a policy and is now ready to engage in a receivership program that would take ownership of properties that are tax delinquent, that are condemned, that are under minimum housing standards orders, and offer some resources to the developer who would rehab that property and get it back into the marketplace. Brett Byerly and Brittany Keelhern have established, are in the process of establishing a new agency that would be one of the organizations working to rehab houses that are potentially condemned or condemnable. Others in the area are also working on that, Habitat, Housing Solutions, and others. We should do a housing hangout about receivership. It's been a little while since we've talked about that. It's certainly something that will increase housing stock. It will, just as importantly, increase ownership in neighborhoods where we have high rental rates and low ownership rates. We know that having 30 or 40% of a neighborhood as home owning, you get more stabilization of schools, of values, of, the city gets tax benefits out of that by having taxes paid on properties. It increases the value of the properties overall and benefits everyone, intergenerational wealth and so on. So we're hopeful that the receivership model will work in Greensboro. We'll be one of the first in the state to take advantage of that, that law. And we're excited to see if that's when that's going to start rolling out. But I do want to hold that for another hangout, and I'll see if we can get Troy Powell and others on who are working on that issue to talk knowledgeably about it. I see a few last comments here. Michael mentions, asks, has the city expended any of its community development block grant money on rental assistance? And I think Josie's answered that.
Sorry for the typo, Stephen. Michael,
No
if it wasn't clear what I was trying to say, I'm sorry I'm in my car, but CDBG funds, that's the community development block grant funds, everyone. And so that went out in the first round of the CARES Act. That's the funding that the Greensboro Housing Coalition and others received in the first round. So that's the funding that we're operating in now. We haven't received the funding that was described earlier in the call, the ESG funds. That's coming, but we haven't received those funds yet. So we're still in CDBG funding source right now.
Okay. Shoni makes a comment about the dependence on for-profit developers to create affordable housing options. We do know that within our area, we have several for and nonprofit development corporations working, and we're increasing the number of CDFIs that are working on this issue as well. So community development agencies are able to tap low-cost capital, which is entirely necessary to do these large development projects. We have several developers that are working on 4% and 9% tax credit properties. There are several that were just green-lighted and several that are just getting completed recently that have set aside of 30 or 40% of units for affordable housing. We're also looking at models where we're getting health systems investing in housing. The Invest Health Initiative has been focused on models of looking at a neighborhood at a time for investment opportunities, increasing the quality of the housing stock and the number of units. So there are a number of different initiatives going on and folks tackling the issue from state and federal level to the very hyper-local level. But we need more of these models. We need shared equity models where community land trusts are used, where co-ops are allowed, at the same time as more multifamily developments going in places where density currently is not, density zoning is not allowing us. So there's a lot, it's a very complex issue. The COVID impact on housing has just underscored how delicate the situation was. As Leroy said, in January before this issue, we were having so many dire issues of housing stability. want to thank everybody, our speakers, Sel, Leroy, Janet, Tyra, for giving us their time. All of you who've joined us today. We had 78 people online at one time talking about an important community issue. Urge all of you to contact local officials and national officials and make sure that this is a priority as we go into the voting season, and that we keep focused on what assets we have in the community and how do we leverage those assets to provide more housing and better housing for everyone. Thanks everybody for joining us, and join us again next month on the first Friday of the month for another housing hangout. See you all later.
Thank you, Dr. Sil.
Thank you, Leroy.